Is there like latent fear in interacting with her that they say something wrong, like call her Meghan Markle instead of...
Meghan entered Kensington Palace expecting a difficult conversation. What she found was something far colder. On the visitor register, the briefing folder, the seating plan, and every official document prepared for her arrival, the title, Duchess of Sussex, had disappeared. Her name remained, but the royal identity attached to it had been erased. No warning, no explanation, just a calculated silence that turned one palace corridor into the scene of a devastating royal reckoning. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan arrived shortly before noon after receiving a formal request to discuss her relationship with the monarchy. She expected questions about appearances, contact with Harry's family, and the place her children would hold in royal life. Kensington Palace, a London residence used by senior royals, had summoned her for a controlled meeting. Instead, the first message came without a spoken warning. Meghan reached for the visitor card and froze. The printed line read only, Meghan Markle. Her fingers tightened around its edge as she asked where the rest of her name had gone. The receptionist lowered her eyes and answered that she had been instructed to use only what appeared on the page. Meghan did not raise her voice. She placed the card on the desk, looked across the silent reception area, and asked who had issued the order. No one answered. That silence carried more force than an accusation. Meghan opened the briefing folder beside the register. The Sussex crest was gone. A royal cipher, an official symbol showing a person's recognized place within the monarchy, was missing as well. Correspondence labels, seating records, briefing papers, and even a prepared statement used only her civilian name. This was not a typing error. Someone had coordinated the change across the palace before she entered the building. A senior courtier appeared immediately, already holding a second copy of the folder. His timing exposed the truth. The palace had known when Meghan would notice, and officials had prepared for her reaction. He asked her to follow him upstairs, but she demanded one answer first. Had Charles approved this? The courtier refused to reply. Meghan followed him through the corridor toward a drawing room. Her calm had hardened into something more dangerous than anger. When the door opened, Prince William stood beside a table covered with altered documents. He did not greet her. Beside his hand rested the original order, carrying the signature of King Charles. The title had vanished from the paper, but Meghan was about to discover that the decision had been born from something far more personal than palace protocol. Behind the erased title stood four people, carrying four very different fears. Meghan saw an attack on her identity. Harry saw another door closing between himself and his family. William saw a threat to the authority of the crown. Charles saw the consequences of a decision he had delayed for too long. The documents on the table were only paper, but each missing word exposed years of resentment, grief, loyalty, and unfinished conflict. Meghan understood what the title meant beyond ceremony. The Duchess of Sussex was a formal style, linking her to the royal family through marriage, even after she and Harry stepped away from official duties. Losing it would weaken her public identity, alter how her children were viewed, and make every sacrifice inside palace walls feel easier for others to dismiss. William carried a different burden. The prince believed the crown, the institution surrounding the sovereign and the authority of the monarchy, could not survive if royal titles were used without royal responsibility. Yet Charles saw every restriction involving Meghan as another possible blow against Harry. The king had delayed action because policy and fatherhood kept pulling him in opposite directions. Harry received Meghan's message in California. They removed it everywhere. He stood beside the window, read it twice, and called immediately. When he asked whether William was in the room, Meghan paused. She never answered directly. That silence told him enough, and the pain in her voice turned his fear into anger. Charles had already struggled with the same decision alone. Earlier that morning, he had studied the order in his private office, tracing one finger beneath Meghan's title before closing the file. His private secretary waited beside the desk until the monarch finally said, "It cannot remain half-decided forever." The words sounded firm, but his hesitation revealed how deeply Harry still shaped every choice. William's concern reached beyond one appearance. A confidential briefing showed that the Sussex title was about to headline a new international initiative described as maintaining a royal connection. To him, That wording risked creating a second center of influence outside palace control. He believed delay would make the eventual clash even worse. Catherine had seen the papers the previous evening. The Princess of Wales warned her husband that removing a name from documents would not remove the human damage. William listened, but he refused to retreat. Her objection proved that even Kensington Palace was divided over the method. Harry ended the call, opened a locked drawer, and removed an old palace access card. He booked the earliest flight to London. Yet the crisis had begun weeks earlier, during one ceremony that turned suspicion into a royal point of no return. Every royal rupture has a moment that later seems inevitable. In this case, it happened beneath bright lights at a private charity ceremony in New York. Meghan stepped onto the stage, accepted an award, and was introduced with language that stunned Buckingham Palace. The words lasted only seconds, but they crossed a boundary Charles had tried desperately to preserve. By the time the applause ended, William had already decided that the monarchy's last informal compromise could not survive. Meghan and Harry had kept their Sussex titles after leaving full-time royal duties, but both had agreed not to present themselves as working representatives of the crown. The crown meant the monarch and the official authority surrounding the throne. That fragile arrangement survived through trust, restraint, and a clear line between personal projects and royal power. Once that line blurred, every appearance carried new danger. William had watched the warning signs gather for months. Invitations, partnership proposals, and promotional material began placing the Sussex title beside phrases like global royal leadership. The prince believed such language suggested official influence without official responsibility. Charles kept delaying action, hoping a private conversation with Harry might prevent another public battle. The king feared that one hard decision could push his younger son even farther away. Then New York changed everything. Meghan heard the host introduce her as Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Sussex, representing the modern global face of the British crown. Her Royal Highness was a formal style used to signal senior royal standing. She did not interrupt. She walked forward, accepted the applause, and delivered her remarks, while the Sussex monogram remained behind her. William watched the recording at Kensington with Catherine beside him. He paused the video at the exact moment the wording appeared, removed his glasses, and placed them on the desk. "That is not ambiguity," he told her. "That is a claim." Catherine warned him that intent still mattered, but the future king believed silence had already become consent. Charles called Harry late that evening through a recorded palace line. The monarch asked why the introduction had been allowed. Harry replied that Meghan could not control every phrase chosen by an event host. Charles answered that she could control whether she stayed on the stage after hearing it. His words landed hard, and neither father nor son softened. Palace correspondents then exposed something darker. Meghan's team had received a written warning 48 hours earlier, asking organizers to remove the royal language. Yet the wording remained. William prepared a memorandum demanding strict limits or removal from palace recognition. Charles signed temporary approval. Now Meghan and William sat feet apart, ready to confront not only New York, but everything they believed the other had taken from them. The drawing room door closed with a soft click, shutting out the aides, guards, and choreography of royal life. Meghan stood on one side of the table. William remained on the other. Between them lay pages on which her title had been crossed out in black ink. For years, their conflict had traveled through statements, interviews, and intermediaries. Now there was no camera, no courtier, and no distance left to protect either of them. William spoke first. The prince said the altered papers were not a warning. Kensington Palace had begun separating Meghan's private work from official recognition of her title inside royal operations. That administrative recognition meant how palace offices formally listed, addressed, and connected a person to the monarchy. Once removed, the change would shape invitations, correspondence, access, and every future record carrying her name. Meghan looked past him and noticed Charles was absent. She asked why the king had signed the order but refused to defend it in person. William answered that his father had authorized the meeting because their offices had clashed most often. To her, that explanation sounded like avoidance. Charles had made the decision, yet the future king had been left to deliver the wound. Meghan lifted one marked page. She asked whether William understood the cruelty of erasing her title, while continuing to monitor every speech, project, and appearance. He replied that the monarchy could not be rejected as an institution, then invoked as a source of authority whenever royal influence became useful. Meghan's restraint cracked. She accused him of punishing Harry through her, because confronting his brother directly carried too much pain. William's composure broke in return. He said Harry had made his own choices, and every attempt to repair the family had been followed by another public injury. William pushed a silver pen across the table and asked her to sign an acknowledgement accepting the revised form of address. An acknowledgement was a written confirmation that she understood and accepted the change. Meghan stared at the pen, then slid it back toward him. The gesture landed harder than shouting. Meghan reached into her handbag and produced a printed email. It showed that a palace-linked liaison had approved the disputed New York introduction. William read the name at the bottom twice. Someone inside the royal system had encouraged the language now being used against her. The door opened before he could answer. Catherine entered carrying the original correspondence file. She looked at Meghan, then at William, and said the email was genuine, but incomplete. The confrontation had exposed a hidden hand, and the question was no longer whether Meghan had crossed a line, but who had moved that line beneath her feet. Royal power rarely announces itself with raised voices. It moves through signatures, access lists, private secretaries, and decisions made before the person affected enters the room. Meghan believed William had erased her title. William believed Charles had given him the authority to protect the crown. But the original file revealed a more complicated truth. The order had passed through several hands, and one carefully removed paragraph could change who appeared responsible for everything. Catherine opened the correspondence and placed each page in sequence. The first recommendation came from William's constitutional office, the team that advises him on rules, powers, and the future structure of the monarchy. Charles then approved the implementation order, which meant the instruction to put that recommendation into effect. Kensington officials were told to revise internal records before Meghan arrived. William had gained operational control because the king held the throne while the prince managed long-term planning. His office shaped briefings, access protocols, and policies affecting relatives who no longer worked for the crown. That authority mattered because one administrative choice could redefine how Meghan, Harry, and their children were recognized for years. Catherine remained standing beside the table. She told Meghan that she had argued against changing the documents before a direct conversation took place. Her voice stayed calm, but her hands tightened around the folder. Meghan saw the strain immediately. Catherine was not defending the decision. She was admitting that she had failed to stop it. William found the missing paragraph halfway through the file. It stated that a junior palace liaison had temporarily approved the New York wording while clarification was being sought. His face hardened. The prince demanded to know who had removed that paragraph before the recommendation reached him, because the omission had made Meghan appear to have ignored a warning. Catherine turned another page. A handwritten note instructed the liaison to permit the royal introduction for one event, then record Meghan's response. Someone had created a test and allowed her public reaction to become evidence. William read the note twice, while Meghan understood that the trap had been built inside the palace itself. Charles's private initials appeared beside the instruction. The king had authorized the monitored event, hoping Meghan would reject the royal language without being ordered to do so. Instead of speaking directly, he had turned one ceremony into judgment. Meghan closed the file. She said she would sign nothing until Charles faced her and explained the test himself. William called the royal residence. The answer came at once. The king was already on his way to Kensington. The man who had avoided confrontation was approaching, carrying a decision that had wounded both his sons. Before Charles reached Kensington, the decision escaped the palace. A revised guest list was emailed to the wrong address. Within minutes, a screenshot showing Meghan's name without her title began moving through royal offices, private chat groups, and newsrooms. What had been designed as a controlled internal measure became a public humiliation. In London, Meghan felt the walls closing in. High above the Atlantic, Harry opened his phone and saw that the world already knew. A palace employee had sent the updated reception list to an external contractor instead of an internal address. The document named Meghan as Ms. Meghan Markle, while every other titled guest kept a formal style. A formal style meant the official wording used to identify a royal person in palace records. That imbalance made the page explosive, because it showed that the change was not general policy. It had been aimed at her. Kensington Palace reacted at once. William froze outgoing correspondence, cancelled the afternoon briefing, and ordered staff to make no comment. Yet the future king was already too late. Copies had reached broadcasters, newspaper editors and producers, preparing urgent coverage. The attempt to control one woman's title had become a public argument over power, fairness, and punishment. Harry sat alone near the rear of the aircraft when the image appeared on his screen. He enlarged Meghan's name, read the page twice, and pressed the call button. After asking the cabin crew for privacy, he called Charles again and again. The king did not answer. Each failed attempt deepened his belief that his wife had been isolated on purpose. Meghan discovered the leak on an aide's phone before anyone warned her. She saw strangers debating whether she still belonged to the royal family while she remained trapped inside the palace where the decision began. Her controlled anger broke into visible hurt. She told William that the leak was not the true humiliation. The document itself was. William ordered a formal investigation, meaning an internal inquiry to identify who released the record and how it escaped. Meghan watched his certainty weaken. For the first time, the prince appeared to understand that protecting the crown might have created the spectacle he feared most. Then a second page surfaced. Harry remained listed as the Duke of Sussex. Meghan alone had lost her title. Harry stopped calling his father and left William one message: "Do not ask her to sign anything before I arrive." William listened in silence as security announced that Charles's car had entered the gates. The king was no longer arriving to approve a policy. He was entering a family crisis that had become impossible to hide from the world. Charles entered the drawing room without a private secretary, an equerry, or a legal advisor. William moved toward the door, but the king asked him and Catherine to leave. For the first time that day, Meghan was alone with the man whose signature had allowed her title to vanish. There were no officials to translate their words into policy. There was only a father who feared losing his son forever, and a woman who believed his silence had made her the enemy. Charles sat opposite Meghan and placed the signed authorization between them. An authorization was formal written permission, allowing an order to move forward. He admitted that he had approved the tests surrounding the New York ceremony and allowed William's office to prepare the removal documents. Meghan listened without interrupting, but her stillness carried an accusation. Charles said he feared the Sussex title was becoming a parallel royal platform, close enough to the crown to carry influence, but independent enough to avoid responsibility. The king believed the monarchy needed a clear boundary before confusion hardened into precedent. Yet he knew the rule had been applied to Meghan alone, turning a constitutional concern into a personal wound. Meghan finally answered. She told him the title itself was not the deepest betrayal. The real injury was being tested through a staged public moment, instead of being approached directly. She said the family demanded trust, while choosing surveillance and secret judgment whenever honesty became uncomfortable. Charles lowered his eyes. He admitted that he had acted as sovereign when he should first have acted as family. The monarch confessed that fear of another confrontation with Harry had driven him toward a quieter method. That attempt to avoid pain had created something worse. A decision that humiliated Meghan and pushed his son farther away. Charles reached for the acknowledgement form William had asked her to sign. An acknowledgement was a written confirmation, accepting the revised arrangement. After a long pause, he tore the page through the center and placed both halves on the table. Meghan watched closely. The title would not be erased through an ambush. Charles then offered a final settlement. Meghan would retain the Duchess of Sussex title as a personal and family designation, but palace records would state that it carried no working royal authority. The same rule would apply to Harry, ending the unequal treatment exposed by the leak. Meghan agreed to consider it on one condition. Charles had to tell Harry himself and publicly accept responsibility. The king lifted his phone just as Harry's plane landed in London. The private compromise had changed the outcome, but the monarchy still had to face the world and admit that secrecy had created the scandal. By evening, the private crisis had become a national drama. Cameras lined the pavement outside Kensington Palace. Commentators examined every missing word as though it were a constitutional earthquake. Yet one image came to define the entire day. Meghan's visitor card lying alone on the reception desk, carrying her name without her title. To some, it represented overdue separation. To others, It looked like a deliberate act of royal erasure. The palace could no longer remain silent. Broadcasters interrupted scheduled programs and asked whether the palace had tried to strip Meghan administratively without announcing a formal decision. Administrative removal meant changing how royal offices recorded and addressed someone, even when the legal title itself remained. Lawyers, former staff, and commentators argued over that difference because it decided whether the act was simple housekeeping or a calculated humiliation. Charles rejected the first draft of the palace response. William's team wanted language about institutional boundaries, but the king insisted the statement admit the personal damage. Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and the monarch's communications office exchanged competing versions while Meghan waited inside, knowing every delay allowed the accusation to grow. A newspaper seller outside the gates lifted the evening edition. Its headline read, "The Duchess Who Disappeared." Beneath it sat Meghan's arrival photograph beside a copy of the altered register. People gathered around the stand in silence, then began arguing about whether royal privilege could be separated from royal service. A crowd formed near the sunken garden, a memorial space within Kensington grounds. Some people held signs defending Meghan. Others said titles should belong only to working royals. One woman placed a handwritten card near the gate. "A name is not a weapon." The sentence spread online within minutes and became the day's emotional verdict. Harry entered through a side gate and found Meghan in a private room. He embraced her without speaking. His anger softened only when she explained that Charles had agreed to reverse the unequal order and accept responsibility himself. Harry listened, but he did not forgive the method. Charles released the final statement through a documented palace announcement. It admitted that removing Meghan's style from internal records had been premature, inconsistent, and personally authorized by the king. It confirmed that both she and Harry would retain their Sussex titles as personal designations, without official representative authority. William entered after the statement went public. Harry, Meghan, and Charles turned toward him. The policy had been settled, but the brothers still had to decide whether they could speak without another institution standing between them. The world had received its explanation. Now the family faced the deeper verdict. What the erased title revealed about everyone trapped inside. The crisis ended not with a victory, but with an admission. Meghan's title returned to the documents. Harry's status was placed under the same rules. William's demand for clarity survived, but the method of secret tests and silent erasure did not. Charles had tried to protect the monarchy from another public conflict, and instead exposed the private fear at its center. By midnight, the papers had been corrected, but no one in Kensington believed they could return to the way things were before. Charles placed the revised agreement on the table, and each person signed it in silence. The agreement was a formal written settlement defining how the Sussex titles could be used. Meghan and Harry would keep them, but their commercial, charitable, and political work would remain separate from official crown representation. William accepted the boundary because it protected the monarchy without isolating one person. Palace staff restored Meghan's title to the visitor register, correspondence system, and family records. A clarifying notation, an added sentence explaining the limits of a title, appeared beside both Sussex names. The same rule now applied to Harry. That correction mattered because equality replaced punishment, and the palace could no longer present Meghan as the only source of danger. Meghan returned to the reception desk before leaving. The staff member handed her a corrected card reading, "The Duchess of Sussex." She studied it, then placed it inside her handbag. Meghan did not smile in triumph. She understood that the title remained part of her history, but it no longer measured her dignity or controlled her future. Harry faced Charles without anger, hiding his disappointment. He told his father that the title had never mattered more than trust, yet the palace had treated trust as expendable. The king accepted the criticism without defending himself. Charles asked whether they could speak directly next time, before fear hardened into policy and silence became another wound. William then admitted that the monarchy needed firm boundaries, but Meghan should never have been judged through incomplete evidence. Harry offered no instant forgiveness. Still, he agreed that future disputes would be confronted privately before they became public warfare. The brothers had not repaired everything, but they had stopped pretending procedure could replace honesty. The erased title exposed the monarchy's deepest weakness, its habit of using paperwork to avoid painful human conversation. Once Charles abandoned secrecy and accepted responsibility, the family finally reached the clarity that official documents had failed to create. Meghan left Kensington still the Duchess of Sussex. The title remained, the boundaries were fixed, and dignity survived the attempt to erase it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.